Libby Wescombe, welcome to the show. How you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me. It's exciting to chat. It's been a while since I've done a podcast.
Me too. It's been a few weeks at least. Probably not as long as you, but cool. Yeah, I'm excited to chat as well. So, first question. I feel like you've transitioned a little bit out of the pro-metabolic world. What is your biggest gripe with the nutrition and health space today? And where do you see yourself in that world today?
Yeah, well, I kind of was never really in deep with the pro-metabolic world. I feel like I was always a bit of a black sheep, if you could call it that. Like I was always getting in trouble from the really intense pro-metabolic people. I was like constantly being told off when obviously I started as a CrossFit coach, I kind of started to find the pro-metabolic space, or rather Dr. Ray Peat's work, which is what I really appreciate mostly. And I found a lot of good, like he has great principles, obviously. And especially for like some of the women that I worked with, they had gotten to the point where their metabolisms were clearly low, and their thyroid, a lot of them had thyroid issues. Some of the ones who were just like super intense dieting and just training constantly, you know, all the symptoms of poor thyroid health were there. So I kind of found it from that perspective. And I was like, this is amazing. Like someone's finally teaching women that carbs are good. And, you know, his incredible viewpoint in terms of like eat really nutrient dense foods like oysters and liver and all of that. So I started really, you know, promoting that in terms of for the women that I was working with, particularly the ones who were a bit, who had downregulated their metabolism and that. But then I guess that's kind of what brought me into the world. And then I just realized, oh, there's this whole other side to it that's extremely restrictive. And I just never got on board with that. Like I've never changed. I've always just been exactly who I am in terms of like, you know, I don't believe in the restrictive stuff, and it's always left a really bad taste in my mouth. So that's kind of where I was just in this world suddenly. And I'm like, no, I don't agree with that. Like, that's silly. That's restrictive. But I do obviously want women to be well fed. Like that's my entire life's goal is like, hey, you guys need a fuel for the life that you want to live. And, you know, like well fed, well fueled, you can do a lot of things when you have enough food. And when you're eating healthy, nutrient dense foods, you don't need to be afraid of carbs, all of that stuff. So yeah, I guess my gripe is always just the extremes. I don't like extremes. And overcorrecting. That's a big one for me, is just this whole overcorrecting where things that I was always like, yeah, well, that's normal. And we should be doing that. Now it's turned into a fad, for example, cardiovascular fitness, doing cardio. I've always been about that. I've always been like, hey, yeah, you should do some cardio, you know, maybe not all high intensity, like polarize your, you know, do some high intensity, some lower intensity for recovery. And then now I've noticed it's turning into a fad again where, you know, the biohackers are getting on board with it. And then it's like so women are now getting confused because they're being told by some people that they should only do really high intensity sit and no zone 2. And then other people are like, zone 2 is the only way, you know, you shouldn't do any zone 3. Zone 3 is horrible. Like it's going to kill you. And it's just becoming a fad. And then as soon as these things become fads, I'm like, why can't we just leave them as normal, healthy? Like, I mean, it's even part of the Australian government guidelines. You know what I mean? Like, it's just such a normal thing. Like, why do we have to make it into this whole thing? So that's a bit of a pet peeve, you know? I mean, even just like balancing your blood sugar, like that was huge when I first was helping the women at CrossFit. I'm like, you need to make sure you're eating carbs, protein, really balance your blood sugar. Like that's why you're having these energy issues. That's why you're feeling faint. That's why you're having gut issues and all that. And then like, you know, it ends up being a fad. Like you get, what's her name, the glucose goddess, or like, not to whatever, she's fine. But I'm just saying like, she just gone and turned it into this whole fad where you have to like eat in a certain order and you have to check your blood sugar levels. And it's just like, hey, you know, let's just be healthy. So yeah, I guess, does that kind of answer?
Yeah, absolutely. If you take anything to the extreme, it obviously gets kind of, you just lack nuance, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it turns it into a weird fad / like where it's like really rule based as opposed to just bringing the nuance in. Yeah. And it becomes like set rules, whereas something like cardio or movement, or, you know, we're made to sprint, we're made to do some cardio, we're made to do these things. It shouldn't be so intense with the rules. Like you must track your heart rate. If it goes even slightly over, you're like going to plummet and your cortisol is going to elevate. And so, yeah, I think that's my main thing, my main issue.
So as someone that is kind of jumping on the hybrid athlete bandwagon, I used to run and then I got away from it because I was just kind of a meathead for a long time. And now I'm like, running is actually kind of cool. I'd like to be able to do that for a long time. How do you feel about this big movement coming around where everyone's doing cardio again?
I think it's good. I think it's healthy. I mean, I like that it's kind of come back to that. Like I think it's probably from a little bit of leftovers from COVID era when I noticed that on TikTok, because that's when I started kind of like looking at TikTok, and that when a lot of people just started running because they obviously didn't have gym access for a lot of it, and then they started training from home. So I feel like it's kind of a leftover from that, and it's been, as soon as things go popular online or on TikTok or Instagram, people just jump on the bandwagon. But I think overall it's healthy. I mean, I think the fear of it and the whole, it's going to steal all your gains and you're going to lose all your muscle, I think that's all ridiculous. So I just hope it doesn't turn into just like everyone's the cardio bunny again and nobody lifts. But I don't see that happening because it's pretty popular as well, the lifting. So yeah, I think it's cool.
Yeah, me too. You think we're finally finding a good balance with that, with everyone kind of popularizing cardio? Now it's like we got some lifter bunnies too, cardio bunny tied with the lifter bunny.
Yeah, I think it's better when it's balanced, because if you do think about, what makes someone overall healthy, like if you're coming from a standpoint of a particular very specific goal, then sure, you probably want to prioritize whatever that is. Like if it's a bodybuilding goal or if it's a powerlifting goal or whatever, you probably still do some cardio for health. But if you're coming from the standpoint, which I am, and a lot of the girls that I coach are, in that they just want to have overall good body composition, really good health, really good energy to be able to do, like I said, all the things without getting tired and all that, then yeah, I think that it's a really important thing to have a balance with it.
Yeah. What do you think that balance is in terms of if you were to give like assigned days per week of cardio versus lifting?
I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, is that you also have to progressive overload your cardiovascular fitness. So you have to progressive overload your cardio. So a lot of people tend to like hold on to this, oh, I'll just do one cardio session a week for recovery. And it's like, yeah, that's fine. That's better than nothing. But in order to actually improve your cardio, so strengthen your heart as a muscle, you'll need to progressive overload that as well. And then you can get to the point where you're maintaining. But I think that it should be more like 2 or 3 times a week of cardio. And then the same, I would go more like 50-50 if I'm completely honest. That's what I would say in terms of health.
Okay. Is most of that, like 2/3 of that, being like zone 2, low and slow?
You should probably do more low and slow. I think a big thing that happened back in the day is that everyone was doing too much of either the moderate or the really high intensity stuff. And then that was where you can see problems happening, because you just have so much less recovery resources then, because you've put a lot of recovery, you've taken a lot from the strength training, and then you've taken a lot from the high intensity. So you're left with this basic empty bucket for your recovery. And then that's where problems start in terms of health. So I think that from that standpoint, you should do probably more low intensity zone 2 type cardio. And then I would still do like 1 or 2 sprint sessions a week, depending on, your level and all that. Of course, you don't want to start all out as a complete beginner, but yeah.
Yeah. Would you like zone 3, 4, 5? Would you include that in sprints?
Yeah, so it depends on your goal. So at the moment, I would say I'm probably a little bit less balanced, because I'm actually trying to increase my cardiovascular fitness I'm not doing a half marathon, but I'm programming for a half marathon for my members. So I always test every single program I do. Like I'll literally test it myself, regardless of what happens to me, because I'm not going to give someone something that's ridiculous. So I am testing it. And in order to actually improve, I'll have to do some zone 3. So we call them, like, from a running standpoint, tempo runs, which is where you're basically doing intervals, but they're like 5-minute or 6-minute intervals. And then you slow your pace down for a couple minutes and then you pick it back up. So in that 5 to 6 minutes, I would say I'm in zone 3. So it kind of depends on what your goal is. But I think that if your goal is just fitness and, the longevity benefits that come from it, I think you could just do high intensity, even just like, 1 minute, 30-second sprints, and then a lower intensity couple days. I think that would be fine. I don't think everyone needs to go into like all the different middle intensities.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. I will never forget. I have a very vivid memory of this guy. We were playing basketball and he comes over and asked if he could ask for the ball to see if he can dunk. And he had a couple of drinks with his friends after work. And this guy, probably in his late 40s, gets like 3 inches off the ground. And I was like, dude, did you really think like you could dunk? But my memory and my takeaway is like, I think you don't know that you've lost it until you start to try running again. And then all of a sudden you're like, dude, I am out of shape.
Yeah, I know. I totally agree. Yeah, with everything, even something like you said, jumping or explosiveness is another thing you lose pretty fast. Speed and explosiveness.
Yeah. So do you think zone 2 in and of itself, like the low and slow, is, how do you view that in terms of recovery? Because it is like an added stress. It's just kind of more like walking. It's not very stressful.
Yeah. So the thing with the zone 2 is that it tends to not put your bodies too much into that sympathetic state or that fight or flight state, because like you said, it's a lower intensity. So the whole like beauty of zone 2 is that it's pretty low in terms of recovery, so you can recover from it. Like if it's genuine zone 2, a lot of people are like, I'm zone 2, and it's like their heart rate's 159 or something. So like it should be quite low. It should be obviously like, I like just 180 minus like your age is a good guide. That's gonna be like give or take a few beats per minute, of course, but that's a good guide. So that would put me in around 139, 140, which is like what is really my zone 2. So if I can keep it there, if anything, it actually boosts my recovery. So obviously, depending on like your fitness level and that, I think the beauty in zone 2 is that you're getting those really cool adaptations that you don't get, the heart adaptations, when you're just walking or when you're in like that zone 1, just moving around. You get a lot of great things out of that too, but you don't get those specific heart adaptations that increase your fitness, your cardiovascular fitness, make your heart healthier. But yet you also don't get the really bigger recovery costs that come when you go into the higher zones. And those are there. Like, for example, if I do a really intense tempo run, I can see the next day my heart rate variability is lower and my body's in my recovery score, as they call it on these, wearables, is low. So it is a thing. Like it costs like recovery. So yeah, I think that's the beauty of it. And that's why everyone is turning it into a fad and everything, because it is quite useful in that way.
Yeah. When you speak about scaling cardio, is the only way to scale zone 2 really just to go longer?
Yeah. You got to just do a little bit more distance. Yeah.
Okay. So what is your distance looking like right now for your half marathon prep?
So last week I did 30 kilometers across the week. I'm not sure what that is in miles.
I think it's like 6 miles. Does that sound about right?
I think it's more.
How long does 30 kilometers take you to run?
Oh, I didn't do it all in one go.
Well, yeah, I figured.
I'll look it up. It's 18.6 miles. So.
Oh, okay. 18 miles. Yeah. Okay. Way off. I was thinking kilograms to pounds, which is like 2.2.
Yeah, I know. It's so annoying, isn't it?
Yeah. We need to get over to metric.
I know. It's so annoying. But yeah, that's kind of like my amount. And I feel like that I'm kind of maxing it out in terms of what I would ever want to, like, I would never want to do more than that. It would be hard on my body and hard on my feet. My heart rate's pretty good. Like I'm good with the fitness now, but just like on, the feet and that, I have like some feet issues. And so, yeah, I would say like there would be no reason for someone to do more than that, or even like that amount from a health perspective. But I think that obviously if you have specific goals, then you would need to, because you got to build the base first. So that zone 2 really helps with building a base, and like runners often say, you just need time on your feet basically to get better at it. So that's something as well. If you're going to do a race, like say you're going to do a half marathon, I think it's 13 miles, 21 kilometers. You're going to need to make sure that you have enough time on your feet and you actually really are able to build the work capacity up, not just so much the fitness, but even just what your body is capable of, so you don't fall apart. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm up to now. But if I wasn't doing this, I like to do a good couple of zone 2 sessions. I'm happy. I like to go up to 60 minutes, because there's also some research showing that after like that, it's more like an hour and a half mark. That's when you really do start to dip into your recovery resources, because you've used up all your glycogen. And then you start to obviously need a lot more recovery. But then if you go much less than like 45 minutes, you aren't usually in the zone 2 long enough to get those adaptations either. So yeah, there's obviously, if you're a beginner, you should start with 20 minutes, and build up slowly. But at my level, that's kind of where I would stay for a maintenance perspective. And then I would do probably like one longer interval session and one shorter interval session. I like to do the intervals after my upper body strength training as well, to save time.
That makes sense. How long do those workouts take you?
The intervals?
The intervals, yeah.
So pretty short, like 20 minutes because I would do like a sprint one, maybe like 10 rounds or 8 rounds. So yeah, 20 minutes, if that. A longer one, I would probably just do more like 2 to 3 minutes. Yeah, I would
Sprints after a workout has got to be pretty rough.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it after lower body day normally. It's usually upper body day is easy though.
That's fair.
Cruisy.
Yeah. That's cool. What do you notice in terms of your recovery after having done and be in the prep of this half marathon?
As in, have I noticed it been worse?
No. Like, is it improving? Like, what do you know other than your literal HRV score and your recovery? Like, do you notice like I'm sleeping better, like my digestion's better or worse or anything like that?
So I never have digestion issues. Fingers crossed. I've been like, I can eat anything. Like,
That's awesome.
But I don't have sleep issues either. So that's been the exact same. Like I always sleep through the night. I never get up to go to the toilet. Nothing. I can sleep on anything. Like I can sleep. I go out camping and I sleep in like the swag and everything. So that's really good as well. But something I have noticed is that my recovery from strength training is like next to nothing. Like I'll do a really hard set of pendulum squats and I'm recovering so much faster, as in my breath comes back down to normal really quick. And then the other thing I've noticed is that when I'm doing sprints or like those tempo runs, even though it feels just as hard, I feel like I have more control over my body and my breath. So like I guess you could say it's that kind of like place where you're in that very anaerobic state where you're using just pure carbs. And, that obviously can't last forever when you're hitting that anaerobic state. I feel like I can push that for longer. That's something really cool that I've noticed. And that's almost like a very cool performance thing. Because even when I was in CrossFit, I was like, you do, because it's basically all that glycolytic type of stuff, like the Metcons and that. And I would do them and I would feel like I just hit the wall at a certain point. Whereas I feel like I can actually push that longer now. And I was telling my partner the other day, I'm like, if I knew everything that I know now about that, building that aerobic base instead of just trying to be a super anaerobic athlete, I feel like I would have done so much better in CrossFit.
Yeah, that is a super cool kind of adjunct benefit. Because if you want to keep like pushing volume in the gym, at some point either got to spend all day in the gym or figure out how you can do more in less time, which I think is a win-win all around.
And that's such a lifestyle friendly hack for people, even though it will initially cost you more time. You can then maintain the fitness levels by just doing less of it, and it will actually cost you less time in the gym, like you said, which is everyone's looking for that. Like at least a lot of my Gen Pop, women that I coach.
Yeah. Do you miss CrossFit at all?
I miss certain aspects of it, but I actually don't miss it that much, if I'm completely honest, because I feel like I've gotten I took a chunk of good things out of it. Obviously, I see I see some mistakes or downsides to it as well. And then I've taken great things out of it, and I've kind of integrated them into my business, my own training, the good. And then, I don't miss the competition or anything. I was never super competitive. I'm not a competitive person. I'm more just like creative type, more like I love researching. I'm not like, so I like to just know everything and try it all, but not in the sense of I want to compete with so-and-so. It's more just like, hey, what is this? I'm super interested. I'm super into it type thing. I didn't really like the competitions.
What brought you into CrossFit then? Because I feel like that's like one of the most competitive spaces around.
Yeah. I feel like, so when I first started CrossFit, it was like in the really early days, like 2010, 2011. And I had actually met my partner at the gym, who I'm like Jamie. And I was only like probably 3 years out of the cult that I grew up in. So I was kind of like open to trying everything at that point. Like I was like, loved fitness. I loved nutrition. I was into it all. But then we both we watched a documentary, the very first CrossFit Games one or something like that. Or we watched something on it and we were like, oh, there's a CrossFit close by. We should go and just do, just try a couple sessions out. So we just went to the CrossFit gym, booked in, and then we were like, this is pretty cool. Like everyone's, supporting each other and all that. So then we signed up to the gym just for something different rather than just like the normal gym stuff. And then I think I did my first CrossFit competition like pretty soon after that. I just was like, yeah, why not? I'll try it. You're young. I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
Early 20s. And like, this is all fun and games. So yeah. And then from there, we became CrossFit coaches. And, I think at some point it kind of like it defines you rather than you choosing the identity. The identity is kind of placed upon you, if that makes sense, which is not necessarily something that I like, but then at the same time, I didn't really, as a coach and then as someone who was expected to I was looked up to, and I was coaching other people, and I felt like I had this pressure that I needed to be good and perform well in CrossFit as well. So it's almost, I feel like sometimes, like now as I'm older, I'm like, I'm very aware of what I want my identity to be, and it needs to be very much close to my own personal values that I live by. Whereas back then, I almost feel like the identity was put upon me a little bit, if that makes sense. So yeah.
So what would you consider your identity now?
Oh, just, I would say it's more just someone who like is interested in living a good, strong, healthy, well-fed life, not necessarily specializing immensely in one thing, or being super specific, or being like a competitor or an athlete. I would say a little bit more wellness. Yeah,
more holistic.
A bit more holistic, yeah, especially with things like recovery and all that. I take a very holistic approach.
Okay. So one of the things CrossFit is kind of known for, at least at this point, is being extreme. Like a lot of, like, not emphasizing recovery, a lot of performance orientation, and kind of putting people into the dirt in terms of recovery. What do you say or think about? Because people might look at you and say, "Oh, she's working out 6 days a week. That's way too much. She must be undercover, and she's thriving on cortisol queen over there." What are your thoughts there?
Well, it's not true.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. People are really weird with that these days as well. Like everything has to be super, like the set amount of rest days, and you can only do this and you can only do that. But I really think that if you're eating like enough food, and you're eating enough carbs, and you're making sure, like I don't work out 6 days a week, and you're making sure I work out 5 days a week. If you count like my cardio days as well. Okay. But if you're eating enough food, you're recovering in terms of like, I think the issue with recovery is that everyone wants it to be super measurable. And because everyone is so different, and the things that stress me out are probably different than the things that stress you out, I think that it's really important to know yourself really well and know the symptoms and the signs that you're under recovered, even if it's like a mental thing, or, you're feeling very extra emotional, or you're feling physically fatigued, whatever it is. But I think that as a whole, we need to stop trying to put it in a box, and it's not measurable necessarily, in the sense that everyone has this particular heart rate variability, this particular, however people love to measure their recovery. I just think that it's important not to, put that in a box, because we're completely different. So I would say that if someone's assuming that about me, that it's just an assumption, because they don't really know my life. They don't, like, I'm very resilient as a person, and I put that back to my childhood as well. And people say like, oh, childhood trauma, and all that. And yeah, my childhood was fairly traumatic, but at the same time, I learned a lot of life skills. I learned a lot of things that I feel play into my resilience today as well. So unless you know someone's complete life story, their history, their upbringing, the way they handle stress, all of that, their fitness plays a big role in resilience as well, then I think that it's hard to just make a straight out judgment like that.
Yeah.
Also, I've never really dieted. Like, that's huge for women. Like, I think that's so underrated.
Yeah, that is crazy. Do you run into many other women that have never dieted?
I've only met a handful, to be honest, that have never actually. And when I say never dieted, you can just tell when someone just doesn't. There's almost no like hang-ups about food.
In terms of restrictions and fears, you're saying?
Everything. Yeah. Like, I literally don't have any hang-ups about food. And I just have only realized since working with women that this is super underrated, because like, even if it, like, when it comes to anyone goes out with me, I'll just eat everything, there's no. And I think that that's something that I can say that is probably partly due to being basically in survival my whole childhood. So I kind of just had to take whatever I was given. And I was like, not gaining weight or not being able to be a specific weight or diet was not even on my radar. And then when I came back to Australia, I had to set my life up from scratch. And yet again, and then I got pregnant, had a baby. It was definitely not on my radar. Like, it's almost a privilege to be able to say that you were able to diet your whole life. Not in a good way, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, because you had, and I'm not saying this for or against you, but like, it is kind of like a a third world problem to like need to lose weight because it's like you had enough food to gain weight and all that stuff.
Yeah, like so I think that it gives me a lot of compassion as well for women though, because I know sometimes like when they're working with me and they have specific, it might be like a thought that keeps coming up and it's obviously not a real fear, but they have these fears around food and that, like it gives me a lot of compassion because I know what it feels like to not have that. And I want them to have that freedom to be able to, obviously you can do things like you do a fat loss phase or you can do, recomp phase or whatever it is, or you can reverse diet, but to not have those like deep set fears. I think that is something that is one of my goals to help women with.
That's awesome. What is your biggest rock in terms of facing those fears and reconquering those or conquering those fears?
As in like when I help people?
Yeah.
I would say that a lot of it is the mindset piece, or because one of the things I'm very interested in when I've studied about it is human behavior change. And a lot of it comes down to just being able to work through those fears. So, you can use different things like acceptance, commitment therapy, or cognitive behavioral therapy. And these things have different aspects that really help. So, for example, if someone has a particular food fear, or let's say they have binge eating tendencies or whatever, it's usually actually stemming from an emotion, and it's not the actual thing itself that's a problem. It's the emotion, and it's what they're turning to, food, which equals food or equals restriction for a lot of people. Like they need that control. And I think that there's just very simple things that can help them in terms of realizing that it's coming from an emotion perspective. So even just starting with like naming the feeling that they're feeling. So you're not hungry necessarily, or it's not related directly to the food issue. It's something completely else that's going on in your life. And if you can actually name it. So what is it? What's driving this feeling? And that's obviously the first step, because we can't change it the awareness has to be the first step. And then once they have that awareness, we're like, okay, so what are we going to do to actually deal with this or put this into something else, so that we're not always thinking about it from that body image or that food perspective, So another really good thing is like just challenging irrational and unhelpful beliefs. Like that's a really big part of CBT. And when you can actually question your own thoughts, like, is this true? And then you can sort of come up with, well, that's not actually true. It's literally just a thought that's coming into my head and I'm claiming it as truth. So you can really challenge those thoughts. And then obviously going into skills like, mindfulness skills, like, breath work, or like leaves in the stream, where you're just trying to be a passive observer of your thoughts and not actually like connecting to them. Distress tolerance skills like urge surfing. So there's like different skills you can use. And I'm interested in combining that with the nutrition side of things, as in the very practical, tangible nutrition things like balance your blood sugar and that. But I think that that's sort of something that's underrated as well in the health and wellness space, because everyone's just like, oh, I just have a fat loss goal. But it's like, you might also have all these body image issues. You might also have a lot of food fears. And unless we can actually help you with those things, you're probably never going to get to a point where you're happily in your body, lifestyle lean, as I call it, and able to eat normally. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest rock, if I'm completely honest, when it comes to women, because it always comes down to that, usually, unless it's a knowledge issue, which it is sometimes as well. Like they just don't know about macros. And then if that's easy though, like you teach them and then they're like, oh yeah, it works. And that's always like an easier sort of place to come from.
Yeah, I can imagine. When you're dealing with these more, let's say, neurological, I don't want to call them issues, but struggles, let's call them. How do you, not that you're, I don't think you practice this professionally, but it's like as a coach, what is like let's say I'm having a restriction. I'm afraid of eating any seed oils or something like that. Yeah. What is your first step is in saying like, all right, let's try this approach generally?
Well, depends where they're coming from. Like if they literally can't even like touch anything that has seed oils in, then there's obviously like a big food fear issue there. So yeah, I would probably get to the bottom of what it is that they're trying to control. Like there's a lot of things you can use in terms of like these unhelpful and irrational beliefs. Like what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Or there's something called fortune telling, which a lot of people do, where you're just like assuming that, the worst possible case scenario is going to happen. And it often comes down to one of many of these things. It could be all or nothing thinking, which is huge as well, another cognitive distortion or thinking distortion, where it's like, hey, yeah, you shouldn't drink seed oils every day, but if you have it once in a while, like helping them with that, and oftentimes I notice that a lot of people are very balanced and they have great emotional like awareness, and they're very regulated in one area of their life, but then in another area it's like completely not. So oftentimes I'll take examples of that other area of their life, like maybe they're a career woman and they're great at their job and they're using that, and then we'll be like, well, what if this happens at your work? And they're like, yeah, I wouldn't stress about it. So I'm like, okay, let's see how we can put those skills that you already have into this aspect of your life. And this is why I get so angry as well about like the constant fear mongering and food fear. And it's just endless online, because like, how does anyone think that's helping anyone?
Yeah. Yeah. I went through a phase where I thought I was probably doing some food fear mongering. And I also think, and I regret that, and I think it was completely wrong looking back, but it's also like the dose makes the poison. So much of these things, like if all you do is eat broccoli, you're probably going to have some issues. But
yeah, exactly.
No one's advising you to exclusively eat broccoli.
Yeah, no. Like balanced diet is pretty healthy.
yeah, it does pretty well. I also like that concept of lifestyle lean. I think that's a super interesting thing. So you are big into, and I didn't mean to insult you at all with the like saying you exercise too much. I just think like there is this idea that, even we had a comment recently, women shouldn't be exercising at all on this podcast. So I did with Ashley Armstrong, and we were like, all right, come on now. But it's crazy how, it's weird to restrict in the opposite mindset, right? It's like you should be over exercising 7 days a week, which obviously, someone could be over exercising at 1 day a week. Someone could be over exercising at 7 days a week, depending on the context of the individual. But then saying like, oh yeah, exercise is just blatantly bad. And it's also crazy to me because I work with a lot of women, and a lot of them think like walking is exercise. Like I don't really like. I would just kind of classify that as movement. I wouldn't consider like going for a walk like in terms of like recovery score or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, like I agree with you. I mean, walking, then but it's funny because then you see someone say walking's not exercise, and then it went viral, and like I've seen a reel, and then everyone's like, how dare you say it's not exercise? Like, encourage people to start where they are. And we're like, yeah, of course. But we actually work with women who are already like, I'm not sure about you, but like, I don't work with necessarily that many like morbidly obese women who would get such great results from just starting to walk. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, you gotta like, yeah. But I agree with you completely. I think that there's a lot of fear at the moment about exercise, which again, that's where it's like we've overcorrected because I actually started my coaching online, where I stopped being a CrossFit coach in person and I started online because I saw this really big need for a lot of women who were smashing themselves to the point where their bodies were falling apart. They were having all the indications of thyroid issues. They were having extreme gut issues, like beyond gut. Like they were having, like, I remember this one girl just had the worst gut stomach pains every day, and she'd come to training and I'm like, something's up here. Like, this is not healthy. So yeah, I think that I started from there. And then if I go back, and because I have a whole list of my entire Instagram posts on this thing called ClickUp, which is cool because you can search easily and like all the links are there. So anytime anyone needs anything, I just send it through easily because you can't really search Instagram.
Yeah, that's cool.
But if I go back like 2020, 2019, a lot of my posts were basically like, hey girls, stop being scared of carbs or like, all that sort of stuff, where it's like, hey, maybe you don't need to do all this HIIT training. You got, don't be scared of taking rest days. Like that was my basic message constantly, 1,200 calories are enough calories for a toddler. Like I'm pretty sure I was probably one of the first person to actually write that post. And then I've seen it come up everywhere. I don't know if I was, but like that was back in 2020. And now I've kind of been like, okay, so we've come full circle to the point where I'm seeing a lot of people scared of cortisol from exercise, scared of any sort of like, scared of different types of cardio, whether it's like you shouldn't do zone 2 or you're scared of the high intensity stuff, scared of also things like compound exercises or, just, anything like that. Even like there's even constant fear mongering around not ever using combination exercises. And I get it. Like I get all the stuff and we're educating women in that. But now it's like if you put any sort of like, I'll do like a Metcon or something and I'll post it on my Instagram and I'm doing clean and press combination exercise or whatever it is. I'm getting like DMs like, why would you do a combination exercise? I thought they were really bad, you know, or someone's like, I thought HIIT was toxic. And I'm like, what? Like, where is this coming from? So I think that we've just gone to that point now where we've overcorrected, as I call it. And that's not necessarily any one person's fault or anyone's fault. It's just it's really weird. Like I'm really into like looking at social media trends and all that from a big picture perspective, as in a human behavior perspective. And I think that that's where it's from. I don't think it's necessarily anyone in particular to blame or so. Yeah, I agree with you that I think you can do a lot of things. You just got to eat enough. You got to make sure that you're recovering, sleeping well. And as soon as you start seeing anything, like if you're aware of your body, as soon as you start noticing something, like nip it in the bud, change whatever it is that's not working. If your weights are never going up at the gym and you're never being able to, if they're going down, for example, something's not right there, whether it's, you know, you don't have enough energy, you're not putting enough energy into your session. Maybe it's a carbs issue, or maybe it really is that you're not recovering from your weights either from your training. So you need to check your programming. Like if we're aware of these things, we can actually fix it before it becomes big health problems, which is what I think's happened in the past to a lot of people.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of it also has to do with, because there is hints of truths with all these extremes, like don't do this, don't do this. But at least in the US, I feel like there's a lot of neglect in terms of the symptoms that you're discussing. It's like, oh, it's normal to be exhausted and cold all the time. And then it's not a problem that we have to deal with. It's just like, then all of a sudden you're super, super hypothyroid and over exercising and under eating caused it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so for sure. I think not. Sometimes I wonder, but how can people just keep going on feeling like shit? I always wonder that. Like, I mean, that's why I think that some people maybe just don't even listen to their body at all. So it gets to that point. And yeah, it's definitely like, so then you will have someone who's a complete mess. And then someone's writing an Instagram post because they're helping people like that. And then everyone else sees it or whatever. And maybe they actually need to do more training for someone else. So yeah, it's super individual. And that's, I think, what the problem is. And also people make it into, because, you know, obviously like things go viral when you use clickbaity type things. So if you're saying something's toxic, like, of course that's going to go viral. Or if you're saying something like cortisol is the worst thing in the world and you need to stop doing HIIT, that's going to go viral. And people also like, as human consumers, we like things that are very easy to digest. So you want to know yes or no. Don't do this, do that. And, you know, if you write anything nuanced, it's not going to go well with the algorithm because it's almost too much effort for people. So they just scroll right by.
Yeah. How do you manage that?
I try to have a balance. My partner often says you need to be a little bit more. It's funny because people call me polarizing and I'm like, I'm not polarizing. It's just that I always like to bring things back to normal, whereas everyone's just like, woo, like crazy on one topic or crazy on another topic. So I like to bring it back to normal. But yeah, it's hard with social media. It's hard to grow as a online person because I do not, like, I'll refuse to, I have boundaries. Like, I'm not going to say something that's just only to grab people's attention if it's not actually what I believe. So yeah, it's hard in that way because I know that a lot of people do very well by using very clickbaity type.
Yeah. It's just not you.
You can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just can't.
It's an interesting conception of like trying to play the game without trying to break you.
Yeah, exactly. I think storytelling's good because like if you use your own life and your own story, you're never going to be dishonest because you're just being authentic. And also it's different and it's unique. So I think that's something that I would like to do more of. I have done it a bit, but yeah, I do want to do more of that because I feel like, you know, makes it relatable for people as well. And it's, you know, it's personal. And yeah, I think we're moving away from the super like perfect Instagram feeds and all that. And people want that real life sort of thing. So I think that I can see from a big picture perspective, us heading in that direction more so than the clickbaity, super quick caption, you know, 2-second reels and you have to read the caption to get the information. I can see us sort of trending that direction instead. maybe.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I've loved a lot of your stories, so I should definitely keep doing that. What do you think is the biggest issue in terms of getting women and people in general to eat more? Because I think a lot of the issues that we're seeing from all this overexercising is just women not eating, or not even women, but just not eating enough, and your requirements go up as you exercise more.
Yeah. I think it's just a fear again of gaining weight. Probably is the number. If I'm completely honest, they don't want to get fat. They don't want to gain weight. Like that's, they say it's about health. They say it's about this. But at the end of the day, I think that a lot of it comes down to that fear of they don't want to gain weight. They don't want to. They want to be happy with their bodies and feel comfortable in their bodies. And they're worried that if they eat more, they're just going to gain weight. But there's oftentimes this like fear of everything happening so suddenly. And I tell women, like, for example, with lifting weights, if you have such a fear of getting bulky, you can stop it before it gets that far. You can, like even for me, I don't necessarily want my back to get bigger. So I just maintain. I'll do back once a week, like direct back. But then I'll just train other parts more often. So it's like, that's a good place to be in if you get to that place. But then, yeah, I think they don't want to, I feel like it comes back to that, but then it's obviously one of those fears or those thoughts that are irrational, because if they need to eat more, they need to eat more. Like you're burning those calories, and you can have a really great lifestyle by eating more and being active. And you'll probably actually like the way you look more because your body will have extra energy to put towards things like building muscles. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's also very rare, like your case, where people are like, I've gained too much muscle here. I want to either maintain it or lose it. Like it's just so hard to gain muscle in general.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. I mean, I find that I can gain muscle pretty easily. So, I've always been like that. So I think that for some women, it's also just a stimulus issue. Like with my training, I have such high stimulus with the movements, and I think that they often just assume it's food. But I think that's kind of sometimes also blown out of proportion, because it's definitely a stimulus issue too. Like as in there's not enough of a stimulus, whether it's they're not actually doing a full range of motion or going to like full depth with something, or they're not lifting heavy enough because they don't realize they can actually lift heavier. Like at this event we just ran, a lot of the women were like, we increased their 1 rep max by like 30 kilos. And it's like, wow, that's actually now I told them that's your new baseline now. You're never going to lift, you're going to keep it at this baseline, and then you're going to increase from there. Because so for years you've been thinking you had this other baseline, but that wasn't even close enough to a max amount of weight that there would be any mechanical tension driving any stimulus. And this is not their own, they're trying, like they think they're lifting heavy enough. So it's like, even though we say it all the time, I think that's a big problem as well with building a muscle.
Yeah. It's really a skill to learn how to push yourself that hard.
Yeah, it is. Definitely.
I think it's one of the huge benefits of CrossFit too, because you just have all the people yelling at you. You're like, do it.
Yeah. And even with things like AMRAPs, which is as many reps as possible or as many rounds as possible, you are literally just going to failure. Even though it's 30 reps, you're pushing to failure, and then you're taking a rest, and then you pick up the bar again and you continue. So it's like, you're not even going to stop until you're absolute, like whether it's pure muscular failure is like the question. It's a little bit of everything, a little bit of cardiovascular, grip gone because you never use straps. So it's a bit of everything, but you know how to push hard, if that makes sense. So you're definitely going to failure constantly.
Yeah, learning that skill. One of the things that I've been thinking about, I'm sure you know about like undulating reps. So for anyone that doesn't, so it's like using both high reps and low reps.
Yeah.
And if you think about like a muscle, like a battery, like you can drain it with low reps, it's going to be probably a little bit further away from hitting emptying it with low reps versus high reps. But like high rep failure, which I hadn't done in a while, I was like, oh, you can just use low reps faster, you get stronger. But going to failure with like 15, 20 reps is so brutal and miserable compared to like 5 or 6.
Yeah, I know it is. And yeah, it's hard to say anything on that side of things, because there's a lot of, I guess a lot of people say now that it's only mechanical tension that drives muscle growth. But then I still think that there's things we don't know fully. Like I'm like, okay, but I think that there would probably still be some other things involved, whereas we can't specifically put our fingers on it because we don't have the research and, there's no data showing it. But yeah, I don't know. I think that there is definitely some value in doing the higher reps, or like you said, alternating even between different phases or different days of the week or different weeks, just to get that full, whether it's, even just muscular endurance, if that plays a role. Like, I think there's things that we don't necessarily fully know yet. And I'm sure down the track, things are going to come out.
Yeah. It's also like for you increasing your recovery between sets with all the zone 2 work. In terms of a study, there's probably not a single study on weightlifting that is long enough for you to see benefits in that.
Yeah, it's true, because it takes a long time.
Yeah, it takes a long time. And then like what, like maybe a study is like crazy long, 13 weeks. Like that's crazy long study. Yeah. But that doesn't take into account the real life considerations that now you can do an extra 10 sets in the same amount of time, the practical consideration that now you can get more muscle growth because you can actually recover between sets.
Yeah, exactly. And just the real life, like people are like, well, you just need to rest longer. Who cares? Just rest longer. You don't have to be fit. And it's like, yeah, but there's real life application that's going to hinder someone if they just don't have the time. So they're going to have to cut their session shorter and miss out. So yeah, there's often the studies and the research and like all the optimal training bros are like really into that. But then I feel like we kind of don't take into consideration real life application sometimes. And I think that also has to do with possibly maybe a lot of people online these days haven't actually had experience training people in person. And I don't think you need to have that necessarily, but I think that it does help. Like sometimes I'll have people train with me and they'll join my one-on-one program and they'll send me their previous coach's training plan. And I'm just like, how did they even think that was doable? Like they're getting them to use a Smith machine and a leg press, alternating, like big, massive pieces of equipment that, at peak hour, everyone needs those pieces of equipment. It's so unrealistic. Or they're getting them to, use like opposite, like free weights. And then they need to also use the gym machines at the same time. And most gyms will be in different rooms. So just simple things like that. Like when you program for someone, keep in mind that they're probably going at a busy hour and they probably would prefer to just have to do their dumbbell stuff together. And then, all these things. And I think that sometimes I see the most unrealistic, unreasonable programs in the name of optimal training because, we better do our short positions first and we better do this and that. And I'm just like, but have you trained anyone face to face in a really busy gym, because it's totally different.
Yeah, I think about that a lot because it's ironic because a lot of the biggest gym hacks, in my opinions, are just like, hey, look at the location of your gym. Like, look at how it's set up and then design your workout. Like, all right, I'm going to do all legs together because they're all together, chest and back right next to each other. All right, I'm going to go back and forth between that. Which has nothing to do with science, right?
Yeah. Convenience is big on the list for a lot of people.
Yeah. Something I've been thinking about a lot too is like we're in this fitness space where it's optimal, like zone 2, cardio, science. And then not 90% of my job I've realized is just like James Clear habit coaching. And like no one talks about that. Like it's like do the short rep position first, like to failure doesn't matter what rep range. It's like, dude, 90% of people just need to build the habit of getting into the gym consistently.
Yeah, 100%. That's huge. Like even in my one-on-one program, I think one-on-one coaching is more geared towards those who technically know what to do, but they just can't get themselves to do it. Whereas my membership tends to be the ones that do the best in my membership are the ones that are actually quite self-motivated and they just need to be told what to do. But yeah, in the one-on-one program, a lot of it I've turned a lot of it into just like straight up behavior change. It takes, like in my studies and research, it actually takes 6 months is the minimum amount to fully make a single change. So if you want to change a behavior, it's going to take you 6 months of not just doing it, but failing, relapsing, all the things until it becomes like what I call a normal part of your life. So it's like when someone is staying lifestyle lean, that's so much more about all the behaviors that they've made a normal part of their life, especially something like movement and just being a super active person. It's not a one-off thing. You can't be like, so for the next 8 weeks for my fat loss phase, I'm going to do zone 2 cardio and be super active, because in order to actually maintain the weight loss and maintain the body that you want, you have to make a behavior change. You have to make it. And it takes like minimum 6 months.
Yeah. I really love that concept that you just brought up, which I never thought about, like learning how to fail, like learning how to get off the gym wagon accidentally and then get back on.
Yeah. Well, part of the stages of change is relapse. That's an actual scientific part of the different stages of change. Like there's obviously pre-contemplation, contemplation, planning, action stage, maintenance stage, and relapse stage. So, it's super normal to relapse. It's super normal. Like if you think about yourself, even like, for example, I'll take me as an example with my finances, which is something I hate, right? I'll go really, really good for a while. And then for whatever reason, something becomes like out of sight, out of mind, or I get really busy in another area and I literally relapse. And then I have to pull myself back into it. And it's the same for someone who's not naturally gifted or not naturally a fitness person or a movement person. So yeah, I think that accepting that that's part of it and not having the all or nothing thinking is, it's not a big deal. It's part of it.
Something I've been thinking about a lot, and this is kind of touching on what you've been speaking to, is that we all have like some area of our life that we just kind of like let go. Like you said, people are really good at fitness, people are really good at this, and they stink at something else.
Yeah.
Is that the difference you see between the really self-motivated people and the people that need more accountability? Is they're stud CEOs, they just can't get themselves to the gym sort of thing?
Yeah, I think that it's just, a lot of it does come down to your natural interests. I mean, think of someone who's always been into fitness and she's always done the group classes and she'll be way easier to coach to say, hey, actually go to the gym. Here's your plan. She'll probably actually take the plan and do it. Whereas someone who's just been struggled so much with gym resistance or training resistance, it's going to be a struggle. And then you're going to have to treat them a different way. It's going to be more about, hey, how can we actually like make those little things easier? Can we make your life easy based around training a little bit easier? Is there things we can do, to help you? Because obviously that's the big struggle. That's the resistance. So like I use a lot of hacks for myself with things that I struggle with. And even like I call it prosthetic accountability, whether it's like, like tracking, for example, that's prosthetic accountability. You have a tracker, you have to fill it out for your macros. So, do you have reminders? Do you have different things work for different people? But it's knowing what works well for them as a person and asking them in their CEO job, what works well for you? What do you love to use? Can we implement something similar into your fitness and your nutrition so that that's going to make it easier for you? Or, where can you reduce other things in your life to make room for this as well? But yeah, I think that people just have different interests, different strengths, and that's just part of being human.
Yeah. Yeah. Reducing friction, I think, is so huge, like making it as easy as possible.
Yeah.
And one thing I've been thinking about as well is when you set a goal, fundamentally, you can't add hours to the day, you can't add days to the week. So you should also think about what are you not going to do that you've been doing that's allowing you to accomplish, that will allow you to accomplish this. What's freeing up the space to open up this opportunity to accomplish that goal?
Yeah, that's something I also talked about at the event because a lady asked a question and she was like, so I have this option of getting these meals, ordering these meals, and they're pretty clean, good macros. Do you recommend for that or against that? And I was like, that's not the question, because if it's going to make your life easier in some way, if it's going to mean that you can put that self-care in other aspects that are lacking, then I would say, that do it. Whereas if cooking something you love and that's a huge self-care aspect for you and you want to keep that in your life, then don't change. You know what I mean? But yeah, it was like the wrong question to ask. Like, it's not, is it good or is it bad? It's like, does it work for you? Is it going to make you reach your goals better and make them easier? Because there's different, I talk about like the buckets of energy and how in this day and age, I feel like our mental energy and our emotional energy is super taxed. And it leaves so little room for us to put into our physical energy, whether it's like building muscle or more movement and these types of things, because we're so cognitively drained and there's only so much energy we can put into everything. So you need to somehow figure out sometimes how to be less cognitively drained so that you have more of that energy that you can put into your physical life. Because most of the women I work with, and probably you as well, have goals, physical goals, and they're just they're not finding a way to reach them. And it's like, where are you putting your energy? Because it's not necessarily a lack of energy always. It's sometimes you're just directing it into things that are taking everything. And like the brain takes a lot of energy, and then we've got social media and we have all this other stuff and it's just constant on us. So yeah.
Yeah. Coming full circle to that recovery conversation we had earlier, I think so much of recovery, you think about it's like your elbow, blowing up and you can't use it anymore, but it's really just like systemic stress. So you can work out too much. You can just have a really bad week at work and it'll severely impact your HRV, how you sleep, everything.
Yeah, 100%. HRV particularly. I think that HRV is like the reason I like to use it with some of my clients, not all of them, but even with myself or some of my clients, is because it shows that cumulative stress across their life rather than, it doesn't even directly show how recovered we are. It definitely doesn't show how well recovered we are from weights. It's nothing to do with that. Cardio it does, but not weights, because weights is basically, you can feel like shit and you can go in the gym and still beat your PB. So if you're actually either doing the same weight or able to do more weight on the lift or more reps or whatever, that shows that you're recovered. Your muscles are recovered enough to do it because of that adaptation. But it does show us overall. And the thing is, eventually, what affects one thing affects everything. So eventually, if you're continuing in this high stress, under recovered mentally or under recovered emotionally or not sleeping well, it's going to eventually affect your training. It's going to eventually affect your muscle gains and that. So I think that that's where it's super valuable if someone wants to track it. But I also think they need to track it properly and make sure that they can commit to that. Otherwise, it's kind of a useless metric. Do you track yours?
I don't. So I'm getting into the whole, like, I'm pretty anti, like, not anti, but like, I don't really love wearables for myself or anything, just because I feel like I have too many metrics that I like, kind of like, recently I've been going on runs and like I bring my phone with me so I can track my distance, but I just want to not look at it. Like, I need to get off my phone.
Yeah.
But where do you see people getting the most utility out of HRV, and where do you think people go too far?
Yeah, I think they get a lot of utility out of it if they tend to have high stress lifestyle, high stress in other areas, because then what that sort of shows them is, oh, look, overall you're quite, so basically if your heart rate variability tends to be quite stable and it's not super fluctuating, that is probably a good sign that they're in a good place in terms of like overall stress and recovery. Whereas if it's really, really fluctuating, then oftentimes I like to try to work on that part of their life and not focus too much on the training. So the training, we obviously do it, like we'll still have the normal training, but I'm not happy to let them try and go into some really intense training, muscle building, like super intense 5-6 days a week thing if their heart rate variability is like chaotic and it's like super fluctuating. So I like to sometimes help them with that first, and it does reflect, like, it's actually quite a good metric if it's used for the right thing. And you can then sort of say, okay, everything's more stable now, we can add this stressor on. So that's where I would use it. Another place I like to use it is, obviously it's quite genetic, but if someone's heart rate variability is very, very low, there's always value in increasing it. There just is, the baseline. Like, no matter what anyone says, it's genetic, sure, 50%, or I think it's 50 to 60%. But if you're in like the 20s and you're in your 20s, that's really, really low. Like, you're probably really unfit. You probably have poor capacity, work capacity, and it would do nothing but good things to increase it. It might not be an aerobic fitness thing. Sometimes it's even just like circadian rhythm, like sleep issues. There's all these things that can help. But if you increase it, you're just going to be healthier overall. Like, that's what the research shows us. So why wouldn't you use that as a health metric and then aim to get it higher as a baseline? So yeah, but the thing where people go wrong is they hold on to like one low reading and they freak out, or they get like one high reading and they're like, yeah, and then it's low again and they're like, why? So you got to have your baseline and know what that is. And then just like your weight changing on the scale, if you're trying to lose weight, it needs to be, incrementally increasing over time. If that's something you want to focus on.
Yeah. Or maintaining, right?
Or maintaining. Okay.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. For anyone that isn't really familiar with heart rate, HRV, heart rate variability, could you give us a 101 of what it is and exactly what you should be looking for? Because I honestly don't really know too much about HRV myself.
Yeah, I think a lot of people mix it up with heart rate. And basically what your heart rate is just the number of times your heart beats per minute. So if you're at 60, it means it did 60 beats per minute, right? If that's your resting heart rate. But heart rate variability measures the variability between each heart rate. So it's basically like, say, for example, your heart beats on 1 second, and then the next one it beats on 0.9 seconds, and then 1 point whatever seconds. So it's like variable. So the more variable it is, that means that your heart rate variability is higher. And the less variable it is, if it's the same each time, your heart, like it beats without any variability, well, it's always going to have some variability. But if there's not much, then that would reflect as a lower heart rate variability measurement. So
that would be like, sorry. That would be like if you have like 60 beats per minute and then 90 beats per minute would be a very high heart rate variability jumping back and forth, versus very low heart rate variability would be like the same 60 beats per minute all the time, right? Is another way of thinking about that.
So that's the heart rate. So that's basically if you have 90 beats per minute, 1 minute, and then it's 60 beats per minute, that means your heart rate is fluctuating. So that's different. But you can have 60 beats per minute and then 60 beats per minute again the next minute, but you can have the variability between beats be different.
Okay. But so
the time between each actual beat.
Am I thinking of it wrong though, in the sense that like if for 90 beats per minute to 60 beats per minute, it would have to beat a lot faster. So the time between beats would decrease, right? So are they related?
Well, yeah, they're related because generally if your heart rate's like very high, you're in that stressed state. And that would mean that you are having less variability. So it does correlate, but it doesn't always correlate. Like oftentimes with someone who's, especially with a female who's very fit, very almost like cardiovascular fit, like let's say an endurance runner, right? And she has like, maybe she's having like LEA, low energy availability. She's not eating enough. I'll often see a high heart rate variability and a very high heart rate as well. So that's something that I can see. And then other times I can also see a low, like super low resting heart rate, like in the 40s, and also a low heart rate variability. So they don't always correlate, but generally they do. And if you're pretty like versed on your heart rate and your resting heart rate and that, you can tell that when your heart rate is higher and you're more stressed, then your heart rate variability will be lower.
Okay. So why do you want a higher HRV, correct?
You only want it because what the different variability between heart rate beats is showing us is that it indicates a healthy adaptable nervous system.
Oh, okay. So it's related, it's more of a nervous system than heart metric.
It reflects more dominance of the parasympathetic nervous system as a whole. So you're spending more time in the rest and digest state. And if your heart rate's very like super fast and very similar, like the variance between that tends to show that you're in more of a sympathetic state. So it's connected to the nervous system. And that's kind of where you're wanting to have the baseline be higher, not necessarily like a one-off reading as well.
Okay. That's really fascinating.
Yeah. And there's this whole thing as well in the pro-metabolic space about saying that a resting heart rate should be higher. And that's something that I don't agree with. And I would love to actually sit down with someone who knows about it and hear from them as to why. Because I understand, like I said, if it's in terms of like an endurance athlete who literally has low energy availability, then that will generally be reflected in also having a overall lower heart rate variability baseline. And generally what that means is just that the heart rate is like the heart's weaker. It's not pumping very much blood throughout, but you can have a low heart rate. And what it means if you've done it the right way through like proper aerobic endurance and you're eating enough and all that, it basically just means that with each beat, it's actually pumping more blood. So you're technically getting the same, if not more blood pumped throughout your body, better blood flow with less beats per minute. So
yeah.
Very difficult for me to understand the reasoning behind why they want everyone to have a high heart rate, because they say 80 and 90, like that is like all cause morbidity. That's like pretty high. Like I do not feel good. Like if I'm sick and I have a fever and that, then that's when it's like pretty high. So yeah, that's kind of my questions about it all.
That makes a lot of sense. Those two together would probably be a pretty good paired metric for overall health, let's say, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
That you have great blood flow as well. Yeah, it's
like if you have really low heart rate and your HRV is really low, then it's like this is not a good sign. But if you have a low heart rate endurance train and your HRV is in a good spot, you're probably in a good spot.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. Very interesting. So as Libby Wescombe, patented of the Lifestyle Lean podcast world's pursuit, what are like the big things that you think in order to live your lifestyle and in general to live a healthy lifestyle, lean lifestyle life? What are the things you need to do that most people aren't?
I think you need to focus a lot more on just being active. It's huge. And I know that a lot of people say that we aren't even less active than our ancestors, but I just call bullshit on that, because I think that I do think that we might have a lower BMR, which is what BMR is like the bare minimum amounts of calories that we need to survive. I do believe that possibly is lower, but I don't think it's just because of what, one particular thing, like, oh, we're eating seed oils now or whatever people claim. I think it's a combination. Sure, that might be added to it. Our food choices are different. But I think that, because I did read a study a couple weeks ago, so I might get this wrong, but I can send it to you if you want to link it. It basically showed that like the hunter-gatherers were obviously a bit more active, but a lot of the extra calories burned came from what's called EPOC. So that's that post-exercise oxygen consumption, because like especially the women tended to be active for very long periods of time, moderately active, and they showed that they actually burned more calories also from post-exercise oxygen consumption, which technically is part of your BMR. It's not your eat and it's not your NEAT. So if you have high post-exercise oxygen consumption, that means that you have a higher BMR than other people. So that was one of the studies I read. And I think it said that it resulted in, don't quote me on this, but I think it was like 280,000 extra calories burned across the whatever 20 years that they did the study for. So like, yeah, that's not like massive. I think that's like 40 extra calories a day, but that's just from recovery costs from being more active. So that's like one thing that goes into your BMR. Another thing is the process of digesting certain calories or certain types of food. Like they obviously probably ate foods that took more to chew. You know, there's different things, like maybe more fibrous foods in some tribes, for example. So yeah, I think that would play a part in it as well. They also think about it. They would have had to regulate their body temperature a lot more than we do, because we just get to stay in specific, you know, aircon or heaters. So they would burn a lot of calories just through that as well, which is also part of BMR. Obviously, the food digesting would be like your TEFs, your thermic effects of food, but the BMR aspect, I think that there's a lot more that went into play with that if we're going to compare with our ancestors and why their BMRs were higher. And I think that I feel like a big issue that a lot of people have is one-dimensional thinking. And they're like, oh, that's the only thing. Oh, they read one study and that shows that one thing. So I think that I don't necessarily think for us under recovering is always the issue. I think that it is also a lack of movement and a lack of being a little bit more free with the type of movement that you do, not necessarily having to have everything so measured, like zone 2 1 day a week, and then your strength training, and then we sit down the rest of the day. So I think being a little bit more free with that would play a big role. And the other thing, which I did touch on at this event I was at, is that a lot of coaches and trainers say that you should not use exercise to burn calories. And that's now been also a little bit overcorrected, in my opinion, to the point where I was telling them that if you look at all the research, including one huge meta-analysis, it shows that those who've maintained their weight loss, which is basically lifestyle lean or having a high energy flux, where you're burning a lot of calories and you're able to eat a lot of calories because your maintenance are high enough, they actually do a lot of like aerobic exercise, physical activity, movement, all that stuff. So I think that that's also underrated. And I think sometimes we're doing a disservice by telling people it does nothing with calories, like it's nothing to do with weight loss, because then they're focused only on food and dieting. And it's like, no, you don't have to diet. You can be very active. And it's not just a gym session either. Like we can be more free with our movement. You know, why not just go hiking on the weekend? Why not, instead of sitting down for alcohol drinks with your friends, why not go on walks or hikes, or like change your lifestyle a little bit to reflect that? And it has to actually be a lifestyle thing. Because that study that I talked about previously, it literally comes down to like 40 extra calories a day as your EPOC or your post-movement extra energy, but it adds up massively. And if you can do that every single day, imagine you can maintain your results on higher calories. Like, why wouldn't you? You can stay lifestyle lean. So yeah, I think that we're super focused on everything being measured or everything being explained away. And sometimes it's just like, I think we need to move away from that and think about how, as a big picture, we can be more active. You know, we can walk to places more. We don't have to always rely on our cars and yeah, that type of thing. So
yeah, I like to longboard or walk to the grocery store, and it's about a mile. And I have these 2 big grocery bags, and like, do you walk to the grocery store? I'm like, yeah, it's like I enjoy it and makes getting food fun, and I get my steps and I enjoy walking. But it's crazy how inactive the average person is today. Like that's crazy, walking a mile to the grocery store.
Yeah, exactly. And nature as well is good, like the sun, all that. You get all of that at the same time. So yeah.
It's interesting. You've clearly put a lot of thought into the whole analysis of the basal metabolic rate and differences between our ancestors. And when the first thing you mentioned, that study where they had an increase in about 40 calories, I won't quote you, but I was like, oh, I thought this whole thing was debunked in terms of like the post-exercise exercise oxygen consumption, where you need to be doing these like movement snacks all the time. I'm like, oh wait, 40 calories makes a lot of sense. That's not a huge increase, but over the lifespan of an individual, that is a massive difference.
Including the same with like the muscle theory, how, oh, well, it only burns 7 calories per pound of extra muscle you have on your body. It's like, that's nothing. Like, let's just debunk that. It's like, wait, can we not see the value in that? Like, the more muscle, the more you're going to use that muscle every day, the more you're going to, and they still add up. It all adds up. So you put all these things together, and that's what makes someone lifestyle lean. They have high muscular, like fair enough, not super high, but they have a good amount of muscle. They eat a lot of calories because their maintenance are high and they're very active. It's not just the one thing, like it's not just the NEAT itself. It's like I said, everything affects everything. And we're so focused on, like, especially I notice if someone has like a bias towards something, they want to call it, they want that one study to reflect their bias. Or, you know, for example, I don't know why people are so biased against saying the muscle thing, like the calories that, like, it's like, so it's like, why are we even telling people that? Like, why are you telling people, you're on one hand, you're saying, hey, lift weights because it's good for you, it's healthy. And then on the other hand, you're like, yeah, I want to debunk all these fitness people who are saying it increases your metabolism because it literally only burns an extra 7 calories. And I'm like, but why? Like, it's all going to come together to create a better lifestyle for someone. Like, and it all affects everything else. And combined, I'm sure combined, all these things increase your BMR by a fair amount.
Yeah. Which doesn't need to be like 1,000 calories. It can just be 40, 50, make a huge difference. So you are historically, I think, very big on tracking calories, and you've talked about it a little bit. Do you, how does someone, if I want to become more active, and maybe we should define that, but how should I be increasing my calories as I become more active?
Yeah, so obviously, I think another mistake people make or have previously made is doing the increase before they actually start the building. And I think that it's sometimes better so obviously this, I need to put a disclaimer here and say that that's assuming you have a good maintenance calories amount first for your weight, for your activity levels. So in my membership, I have a calculator that I did a couple years ago where it actually has a part where they can put their body fat percentage in. You can take it through calipers or through, you know, whatever it is, like DEXA scan, and it checks their body fat percentage and their calories. So basically it checks for, it's like just a extra check to see whether they are in a good position to go into a fat loss phase if they wanted to, or if they have healthy maintenance calories. And it uses that obvious, you know, it basically, if it's below 30 per kilogram of body weight, it's like, if their deficit is putting them below that, then it's not a good place to go. They need to actually work on building up their maintenance calories first, because they're at a pretty big risk for LEA symptoms. And in general, they want to be around that 45, because most of my women that I work with are pretty active. So they want to be around that 45 per lean body mass.
That's per kilogram, right?
Per kilogram, yeah.
Okay.
So I have that in my calculator. So if
That's
someone
awesome.
was at that point and they were feeling good and they didn't have health issues and all that, that's the starting point. So I wanted to make sure I added that disclaimer, because I'm not telling people not to increase their calories if they need to build muscle if they're below that. Like, we need to make sure that that's our good, healthy base and that's our normal for calories. Then if they are at that point, I don't think they should go into a surplus. I think that they should go and start, you know, making sure that they're doing all the behaviors first that they need to do. And then as they start getting stronger, they're going to need to increase their calories, because obviously what's going to happen is if you're going to get stronger and add muscle, your calorie needs are going to go up a little bit. And then if you don't increase them, you're probably going to get to that point where you plateau, or you even start to, you know, lose energy, get injured and all that, because you're not matching it with the strength increases. So I would just be making sure that every couple weeks, you know, if they have, I would probably look at it more like 4 weeks. I did do it for every 2 weeks with one of the girls that I was doing one-on-one coaching with. But we kind of, obviously the strength gains will slow, like they won't keep going as fast. So then you're going to have to sort of slow down the calorie gains. But I would say that it's a great sort of way to do it, is to increase the calories with the strength, because then you're also obviously then giving yourself a little bit more room if it is just neurological gains, or, you know, you're giving yourself that little bit of a leeway, but you're not jumping up too fast to the point where you're just putting fat on. And then a lot of these women end up wanting to lose the fat anyways. So then you just go into a fat loss phase, and then it takes time out of your year. It takes time out of your strength. It's just, yeah.
The hamster wheel.
Yeah.
What kind of calorie jumps are we talking about here?
Just like 50 calories. I would do 50 calories, hold that for a few weeks.
Okay. That makes sense.
I just don't see the point in any more than that, because you can't gain muscle fast. It's very, very slow. So what do you need the extra for apart from the amount that you're gaining? And, you know, then you can do other things which we utilize a lot, which is like the carb timing and, you know, front loading your calories. It's such great. like such a great strategy to do it at maintenance and still gain muscle. Front loading those calories, having a big breakfast, and say you're training like after your first or second meal, having the majority of your carbs there, so you have a nice full glycogen stores and you can really push, because as I said, it comes back to that stimulus. So do everything you can, put yourself in the best place to be able to drive the highest stimulus at maintenance calories. And I think that you will get amazing results, and you'll start to really change the body recomp, like the actual, look of your body, less fat, more muscle, will slowly start to change, because you're doing it that way rather than like the bulking and the cutting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have definitely been guilty of that, trying to not do that.
Guys don't seem to care as much. They just kind of lose the weight. Well, I don't know. You can speak for this, but I find the girls get super crazy if they put on fat, and it's like, well, what did you expect?
No, yeah, we definitely don't care. I think we're just like, but like when you gain 15 pounds of fat and like 3 pounds of muscle, it's like, yeah, it's just, it's coming on. And you are like, I waste so much time. Like I should have just, taken a slower approach. And that's why I'm like, I shouldn't be doing this cuts and bulks.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is your opinion on this huge trend right now that's like gaintenance, which I'm taking the credit for coining gaintenance, but main gaining, I think Eric Helms made up, someone probably else made up gaintenance, but it's like never bulk, only maintain and gain muscle.
Yeah, I think I mean, that's what I've done. I did one muscle building phase because I wanted to attempt it in 2022. And I just basically did it for 6 months. I stuck to the exact same training program. I only changed out a few accessories. Because I wanted to keep everything very similar, like in terms of all the data. And I just wanted to basically journal it as I did it for my membership. So it was a 6-month gaining phase. I was in only a 7% surplus. So it was quite small. And I obviously put on some muscle. I think the DEXA scan showed that I actually didn't gain much fat. I might have gained like a few 100 grams of fat only. So I think there's also that maintenance range as well, which we don't talk about enough. But I didn't need to go into a fat loss phase or anything because it was so small. But the thing that I didn't like about it was the food intake, because it got really draining to eat that much food. Like I said, I just want to eat the amount that my body wants and needs and feels good in. And I didn't want to have to push that amount, because it was like, why? Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So then I ended it abruptly. I was going to try and do 9 months, but I ended it abruptly one night because I actually was trying to get in. I had like protein cottage cheese with jam and maybe like a few, I don't know, something fat related. Some coconut flakes. And I was literally just like slowly eating it and chewing it. And then Jamie, my partner's just like, what? I started gagging a little bit. And he's like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm just trying to do this, get the rest of my macros in. And so I was just then and there, I'm like, I'm done with this. I'm just going to go back to normal. And then that kind of ended my build phase. But the moral of the story is I did the exact same amount of DEXA scans the next year, 2023. And I had a very similar program, which was 4 days of strength training, and same in 2022. And I put on more muscle the next year at maintenance. So you can't say whether it's from the food or this or that, but I don't know. I mean, obviously I was still training hard. Like I basically had everything going in the right direction the year before. I was keeping my stress low. I was sleeping well. I was pushing to failure or close to failure. I was recovering well. And yeah, I put the before and after photos, I put my measurement increases and everything. And then I did it again without the surplus, and I gained even more muscle the next year. So yeah, that was my personal experience. Was
it significant? The amount, like, did you gain way more muscle the next year, or was it pretty similar?
No, not way more. I think it was only like a few 100 grams more.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's super interesting. I think it probably makes sense for almost everyone.
Especially more advanced.
Yeah. I think it probably makes less sense though if you're super lean. Is kind of like the caveat. If you need to gain weight, then you need to eat in a surplus.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're super skinny, then you probably need to gain some fat along with the muscle, to help. Yeah.
The argument I've heard against it and against like the slow increases, which I think is interesting, I don't necessarily agree with it, is that if you go so slowly, he said anything below 250, this is from Mike Isertel, I'm paraphrasing, anything below 250 calories, you're going to gain weight so slowly that you don't even necessarily know if you're actually gaining weight, because the scale will fluctuate and people are really bad at measuring calories historically. So I think that is an interesting perspective. I don't necessarily
think you need to gain weight.
if you're trying to maximize muscle growth, this is theory.
Okay. Because if you're gaining muscle, your weight should more or less probably only, if you're like, let's say you're gaining muscle and then you're losing a bit of fat as well. Like, you know what I mean? Because sometimes maintenance calories can cause that recomp. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. The context was like in the pursuit of optimal muscle growth, and like in terms of like, oh, your NEAT will go up and things like your maintenance range increases. But I got to give credit where credit is due. I feel like you were the first person I heard talk about reverse dieting. And at the time I wasn't ready for that. I was like, I don't know, I don't need this. But now I'm like, oh, reverse dieting is the move. So you were way ahead of the curve there as well.
Yeah. I just, with the girls, like with the CrossFit girls, that's what started it. And then obviously I found like Lane Norton talk about it. And then I found a few other people. I was actually really interested in Lyle McDonald's work way back in the day when I was first, he's bit of a character. Like love him or hate him, but he had some really good points in terms of like, what metabolic adaptation really was. So he's kind of not so, he's a little bit on the other extreme, whereas Lane Norton was like, reverse diet's really important. So I kind of used a bit of their research and put together like, and I think sometimes reverse dieting is important as well, even if you're not necessarily under eating across the board, but if you are what I call in a dieting mindset. So oftentimes, especially women, they're like, I can't lose weight. I'm doing everything. I'm tracking and I just can't lose weight. And then obviously there's like the little extra licks and snacks and, they're binging on the weekend or they're going out for drinks. And it's like, but you're just in this dieting mindset and it must be so draining because you're doing all the work, but then you're also not getting the result, but it's not necessarily in the deficit. So I think sometimes just to get them out of that mindset, it's a really good practice to use the reverse dieting concept, because what that does is it actually brings up their calories across the days throughout the week, and then they don't feel these urges to binge or to go overboard. So you can even use it in that way. And I think that's where a lot of people are like, oh, it's, you have to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight. They're just not in a calorie deficit. And they say they are, but they're dieting this much. And everyone loves to go to, their metabolism's so down regulated that 1200 calories is not a deficit. And I'm like, it might not be that, it might be that they're just struggling because they're trying so hard to track so low, and then it's just things are happening and they're kind of just like, maybe binge eating or so I think from that mindset, I would also add on to that, like if you were to go into a calorie deficit at this point, your maintenance is so high that you would lose fat very rapidly, versus if someone is at truly at 1200, like they're in such a small deficit. I lost like 2 kilos when I upped my running just straight away, and I haven't put it back on. And it's just, I have to be careful. Like I need to eat a lot. So I agree.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also did too, actually. Oh, I lost about a kilo, maybe a kilo and a half when I started running. Last thing that I think would be really useful. So I think we're all in agreement. Tracking is really useful. It's like, if you want to get somewhere, you got to look at directions. You don't necessarily need the directions if you know where you're going, but it can be useful. Maybe if you want to get there on time, hit Waze, miss some traffic. But if we want to phase into intuitive eating, get out of this, like I need to track every calorie that goes into my mouth, what do you think is the first step there?
I think the first step is doing like a gradual approach. I love a gradual approach with everything. You might not necessarily feel comfortable going from tracking everything to just completely eating. I don't call it intuitive. I call it mindful, because I think that there's always going to need to be mindfulness involved. Like you're never going to be able to completely intuitively eat. I mean, with just the amount of food and access we have, and in order to make sure that you're getting, somewhat well-balanced meals so you can balance your blood sugar, I feel like there's definitely going to be a mindful element to that forever. But I think that you're best off doing, like, if you think of it like a tracking continuum. So, think of like a ladder, right? And you have like full tracking protein, carbs, fats, 7 days a week, every day for the whole year. Yeah. You can take the next step down initially, which would obviously be something like either you could go tracking just protein and letting your carbs and fats fall wherever, tracking protein and calories, or you could try something like tracking 5 days a week, 2 days off, or you could try something like, tracking mostly and letting yourself have like one meal untracked or one meal a day untracked, whatever it is. You can use different stages to kind of go down the continuum. And then closer to like eating mindfully, you could say, okay, well, I'm still going to track 1 day a week because I just want to make sure like I've got this sort of template which I play with, and that's kind of where I'm going to go. But I think the main thing to be aware of with that is that eventually you do want to, well, most people would probably want to be able to just not track. So, like make sure that you have like kind of a time frame, or you have a plan with that, so that you don't just stay this kind of like hybrid tracking, because it still takes mental energy, I feel. And I think for me, one of the best parts, because I've been mindful eating this whole year, is just the freedom. It's taken less mental energy. And, I know a lot of people who promote tracking, which I do as well for purposes. They say that it does get easier as you get better at it. And it does. Like I chronometer the back of my hand. I've seen like hundreds and hundreds of women's chronometers accounts, and I've tracked for years and years and years. And of course it gets easier, but I still think there's always going to be this little bit of extra cognitive energy that it takes. And it's just been so freeing for me not to do that. Yeah. And I think there's downsides as well. Like my partner will sometimes track, and he wants to lose, like, let's say this summer, he wanted to lose 2 kilos before summer, just clean things up, after his like little winter free for all or whatever. And then something I noticed about when he tracks is he actually eats less healthy, because he kind of tries to game the numbers. And it's not something like he's very into health like me. He wants to eat healthy, but it's almost like I've noticed he eats so much more variety of fruits and vegetables and all the good things, different protein sources, because we're not trying to make everything super lean protein. And he actually is healthier. So he starts to sometimes get like a little bit of dandruff. And it's not just about the deficit, because it also happens when he's tracked to try to increase his muscle mass. So he's tried to track like higher end of maintenance to build muscle, and it still happens. So there's something there with like deficiencies and that too. And I think that's something that people don't ever mention, particularly coaches, because they're all about keep your meals the exact same, make it as easy as possible for you. But yeah, I'm pretty big on, even if you track for some of the year, at least sometimes try and just not track, so that you are happy to put more variety in without thinking that it's going to be a pain in the ass to track it, like tacos night when you have to measure every single topping.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's really interesting. I like that approach a lot. I also just love the idea and mindset. I like mindful eating as well, but that everything is a skill. So it takes a lot of skill to learn how to track. It also takes a lot of skill to eat mindfully, be in the calorie range, and not track.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that it takes the most switching over is that I feel like you do lose a little bit of sense of your hunger signals when you're tracking. And I think that that's just a natural thing. Because like when I went from tracking to not tracking, I was quite based on just like the timing of my meal. Oh, it's lunchtime, let's eat. And then I would notice that it had been like, an hour earlier and I'm hungry. And I'm like, why am I hungry when I normally eat at 1 p.m. for lunch? And it's 12 p.m. And it's like, oh, maybe my body actually needs it a little bit earlier. Or so I think that sometimes you kind of just, it's almost like it's avoided. You don't even want to think about that, because you know that you're going to have your next meal in an hour, or, you're going to, or maybe you're eating when you're not hungry and you're just kind of forcing it in, and your body actually says, no, because I only have like 3 big meals a day. So it's good to find that time when I'm hungry, because obviously the hunger means my body needs the energy. So yeah, that's something else that I've noticed with women as well. They're like, but I don't really feel hungry, or I don't feel hungry at the same time. And I'm like, okay, let's work with that. Can we find out when you are actually really hungry? Do we need to maybe move your meal timing? And there's that side to it as well.
Awesome. Well, Libby Wescombe, thank you very much. Where can everyone find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Libby Wescombe. I'm actually redoing my website at the moment, so that's probably going to be down. And you can find me on TikTok if you want just like random stuff. I went viral for a political rant the other day. Yeah, so if it's mixed. It has some things as well.
We'll have to check that out, and I'll link everything in the description.
Political rant. It was literally like, "Hey Americans, I have a question here," and then they all started giving me their replies.
That's awesome. That's funny. We definitely are opinionated, us Americans. That's funny. Well, awesome. Thank you very much, Libby. I think this was great. And until next time, guys, be good.
Thanks for having me on.